February 11th, 2026. The Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C. What was scheduled as a routine oversight hearing would transform into one of the most explosive congressional confrontations in modern American history. Before the day ended, two congresswomen would walk out in protest. An attorney general would refuse to look sexual abuse survivors in the eye, and one representative from Dallas, Texas, would drop bombshell after bombshell about FBI files documenting thousands of connections between the President of the United States and convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. This is the story of that day. A story about justice delayed and denied. About survivors who came seeking acknowledgement and received silence. About an attorney general who seemed more concerned with protecting political allies than prosecuting alleged criminals. And about a moment when the carefully maintained facade of Washington politics cracked wide open, revealing the raw anger underneath. By the time this 5-hour hearing concluded, millions of Americans would watch clips on social media, struggling to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The question on everyone's mind was simple but profound. When did defending the powerful become more important than protecting the vulnerable? This is Under Scrutiny, and this is what really happened. To understand why February 11th became such a flashpoint, we need to go back and understand what the Epstein files actually are and why they matter so much. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier who died in federal custody in August of 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. His death was officially ruled a suicide, though it sparked countless conspiracy theories and unanswered questions. But what Epstein left behind was perhaps more important than the circumstances of his death. He left behind thousands of pages of FBI investigation files documenting years of alleged crimes and, crucially, documenting the powerful men who surrounded him. For years, survivors of Epstein's abuse fought to have these files released to the public. They argued that the American people deserved to know the full scope of what happened, who was involved, and how so many powerful individuals seemed to escape accountability. In 2024, Congress finally passed legislation requiring the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files. The law was bipartisan, co-authored by both Democrats and Republicans who agreed that transparency was essential. When Donald Trump began his second term as president in January of 2025, he appointed Pam Bondi as his Attorney General. Bondi was a former Attorney General of Florida and a longtime Trump loyalist. She had defended Trump during his first impeachment trial and remained one of his most visible supporters throughout his political career. As Attorney General, Bondi now controlled the Department of Justice, which meant she controlled when and how the Epstein files would be released. On February 4th, 2026, exactly 1 week before the hearing we're examining today, the Justice Department finally released thousands of pages of FBI files related to the Epstein investigation. Survivors and advocacy groups had waited years for this moment. But when the files became public, what they revealed wasn't transparency. It was a scandal of a different kind. The files contained the unredacted names of victims. Women who had been sexually abused as minors, whose identities were supposed to be protected, suddenly found their full names, personal details, and private information exposed to the entire world. Meanwhile, the names of alleged perpetrators, the powerful men who had allegedly participated in or enabled Epstein's crimes, were blacked out. Redacted, hidden from public view. The contrast was stunning and enraging. The vulnerable were exposed while the powerful were protected. One congressional aide would later demonstrate during the hearing how an email concealed the identity of one of Epstein's associates, while another document publicly listed victims' names and private information. This wasn't just a bureaucratic error. To survivors and their advocates, it felt like a deliberate choice about whose privacy mattered and whose didn't. But there was another revelation in those files that would dominate the February 11th hearing. According to multiple credible news sources, including the Grio, Al Jazeera, and The Hill, at least 5,000 pages of the FBI files contain more than 38,000 references to Donald Trump, his wife Melania, or his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. The files documented multiple instances where Jeffrey Epstein allegedly brought young girls to Trump's properties. They included FBI notes describing interactions between Trump and these girls. They painted a picture of a relationship between Trump and Epstein that went far beyond what had been publicly acknowledged. When Attorney General Pam Bondi was scheduled to appear before the House Judiciary Committee on February 11th for her first oversight hearing since taking office, everyone knew the Epstein files would be the dominant topic. What nobody anticipated was just how personal, how raw, and how confrontational it would become. When members of Congress and reporters arrived at the hearing room that Wednesday morning, they immediately noticed something unusual. Seated in the audience section, directly behind where Attorney General Bondi would sit during her testimony, were survivors. Real women with real names who had survived real abuse at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators. Their names deserve to be stated clearly because their presence in that room was an act of tremendous courage. Teresa Helm was there. Jess Michaels was there. Laura Bloom McGee, Danny Ben-Skye, Liz Stein, Marina Lacerda were all there. Skye and Amanda Roberts attended as family members representing the late Virginia Giuffre, one of the most prominent Epstein survivors who had passed away. Charlene Lund and Lisa Phillips were there as well. These women hadn't come to be spectators. They had come to bear witness. They had come seeking something that had been denied to them for years. Acknowledgement from the American justice system that what happened to them mattered, that their trauma was real, and that the people who harmed them would finally be held accountable. Just 1 week earlier, these same women had their private information exposed to the world when the Justice Department released those files with their names unredacted. The department that was supposed to protect them had instead re-traumatized them, making them vulnerable to harassment, unwanted contact, and public scrutiny of the worst moments of their lives. They had every reason to stay home, to protect themselves, to avoid further pain. But they came anyway. They sat less than 10 feet behind Attorney General Bondi, close enough that if she had simply turned around in her chair, she would have looked directly into their faces, close enough that their presence should have been impossible to ignore. And for the entire 5-hour hearing, they waited for her to do exactly that. To turn around, to acknowledge them, to apologize for what the Justice Department had done to them, to look them in the eyes and commit to pursuing justice for what had been done to them when they were children. She never did. Not once during those 5 hours did Pam Bondi turn around to face the survivors sitting directly behind her. That refusal to look at them, that choice to keep her back turned to the very people most affected by her decisions, would become one of the defining images of the day. It spoke louder than any words about where her priorities lay and whose pain mattered in her calculation. As the hearing was about to begin, reporters and photographers captured images of these women sitting quietly, waiting, hoping. Some would later share that they had tears in their eyes during parts of the testimony. Others described feeling invisible despite being in full view. They had come seeking justice and would instead receive something else entirely, a masterclass in how institutions can fail the people they're meant to protect. The House Judiciary Committee is led by Republican Chairman Jim Jordan of Ohio, known for his aggressive questioning style and unwavering loyalty to Donald Trump. The ranking Democrat is Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a constitutional law professor who served as the lead impeachment manager during Trump's second impeachment trial. The partisan divide on the committee is stark, and it would show throughout the hearing. After opening statements from Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, and Attorney General Bondi herself, the questioning began. Bondi had opened her testimony with what seemed like an acknowledgement of the Epstein survivors in the room, expressing sympathy for what they had endured. But she quickly pivoted to attacking the previous administration, suggesting that the catastrophic file release was somehow the fault of those who came before her rather than a failure that happened on her watch, under her authority. Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington was one of the first Democrats to question Bondi, and she cut straight to the heart of the matter. Jayapal asked Bondi to do something simple, something that should have required no deliberation. Turn around and apologize directly to the survivors sitting behind her for the Justice Department's error in exposing their identities while protecting the names of alleged perpetrators. Bondi refused. According to multiple news reports, when Jayapal pressed the question, Bondi dismissed the request as theatrics. The exchange quickly devolved, with both women speaking over each other. Jayapal attempted to reclaim her time, using the parliamentary procedure that allows members to take back control of their allotted questioning period when a witness is filibustering. But Bondi continued talking, saying she wouldn't get into the gutter for Jayapal's theatrics. The room grew tense. Behind Bondi, the survivors sat in silence. Some had tears in their eyes. They had come seeking acknowledgement, seeking an apology, seeking some recognition that what happened to them mattered. Instead, they were being called theatrics. Their pain, their trauma, their courage in showing up to that room was being dismissed as political theater. Representative Jerry Nadler of New York took a different approach. He asked Bondi a direct, factual question that should have had a straightforward answer. How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? How many are you even investigating? Bondi didn't answer. She talked about previous administrations. She talked about the complexity of investigations. She filibustered and deflected. Finally, Nadler had had enough. According to news reports, he stated plainly that the answer to his question about how many of Epstein's co-conspirators Bondi had indicted was zero. Zero. Let that sink in for a moment. Thousands of pages of FBI files. Multiple named individuals. Survivors sitting right there in the room. And the number of people the Attorney General had indicted was zero. The number she was actively investigating? She wouldn't say. The message was clear. Whatever the Justice Department's priorities were, aggressively pursuing justice for Epstein's victims wasn't among them. Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia called Bondi's behavior Jekyll and Hyde, noting that she was cordial and cooperative when questioned by Republicans, but became aggressive and defensive when questioned by Democrats. He asked her once more to turn around and face the survivors, to apologize for exposing their private information while redacting the names of their abusers. Once again, Bondi refused. Her response, according to transcripts, was simply that his time was up. The pattern was becoming clear. Democrats would ask substantive questions about the Epstein files, about the botched release, about accountability for alleged perpetrators. Bondi would deflect, attack, or claim she couldn't discuss ongoing investigations. Then she would ask the next Republican questioner to yield their time so she could launch counterattacks against the Democrats who had just questioned her. It was a strategy designed to avoid accountability while creating the appearance of vigorous defense. And through it all, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, taking notes, watching the exchanges, and preparing for her turn. When Representative Jasmine Crockett's turn finally came, The hearing had already been going for hours. Multiple Democrats had tried and failed to get substantive answers from Attorney General Bondi. The survivors were still sitting behind Bondi, still waiting for acknowledgement that never came. The frustration in the room was palpable. Crockett didn't start with a question. She started with a statement. And that statement would shake the entire proceeding. According to multiple credible news sources, including the Grio and other verified outlets, Crockett began by addressing what everyone had been dancing around all day: President Trump's name in the Epstein files. She stated clearly that at least 5,000 pages contained more than 38,000 references to Trump, his wife, or Mar-a-Lago. Let me repeat that number so its significance is clear. 38,000 references. This wasn't a case of Trump's name appearing occasionally in files that were primarily about other people. This was extensive, repeated documentation of connections between Trump and Epstein over many years. But Crockett didn't stop at numbers. She got specific. According to reports from the Grio and other news outlets, Crockett cited FBI file notes that described Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's convicted co-conspirator, presenting a young girl to President Trump. The notes indicated that Trump then spent more than 20 minutes apparently flirting with this girl. The room went silent. These weren't vague allegations or partisan accusations. These were references to actual FBI investigative files that had just been released to the public. Crockett continued, referencing another file that showed FBI notes describing Jeffrey Epstein transporting a victim to Mar-a-Lago specifically to meet with Trump. According to the files Crockett cited, Epstein allegedly bragged to Trump, saying, "This is a good one." Think about what that phrase implies. The casual nature of it. The suggestion that this was a pattern, a transaction that both men understood. Attorney General Bondi sat stone-faced, her jaw tight, her expression unreadable. Republicans on the committee shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't political spin or partisan rhetoric. These were references to official FBI investigative documents that were now part of the public record. Documents that the Justice Department itself had just released. Then Crockett made a careful but devastating clarification. According to news reports, she said explicitly, "I'm not saying the president is a pedophile." She paused to let that sink in. Then she continued, "But there is a lot of evidence in these files that suggests that he's very close friends with a lot of men who are pedophiles." The distinction was important and deliberate. Crockett is a trained attorney, a former public defender who understands the importance of precision in language. She wasn't making an accusation she couldn't prove. She wasn't claiming to know Trump's private actions or thoughts. She was simply pointing to documented connections that the FBI had investigated and recorded. She was asking why a man with such extensive documented connections to convicted sex traffickers wasn't facing the same scrutiny that ordinary Americans would face under similar circumstances. Crockett's voice grew stronger as she continued. She referenced how Epstein and Maxwell had made young girls available to Trump on multiple occasions, citing the FBI files as her source. She wasn't speculating. She wasn't guessing. She was reading from official government documents that had been investigated and documented by federal law enforcement. Then she shifted her focus directly to Pam Bondi, and her tone changed from factual recitation to moral judgment. According to multiple news sources, Crockett stated clearly, "The fact of the matter is that you will be remembered as one of the worst attorney generals in history. An attorney general who has prioritized obstruction over justice, corruption over the law, fealty to the president over loyalty to the Constitution." It was a damning indictment, delivered not with shouting or anger, but with the calm certainty of someone stating an observable fact. Crockett had watched Bondi refuse to turn around and face survivors. She had watched Bondi refuse to answer how many co-conspirators she had indicted. She had watched Bondi deflect and attack rather than explain or defend. And she was calling it what it was, a fundamental failure of the Justice Department's most basic duty. And then Crockett did something unexpected. She didn't use her full allotted time for questioning. Instead, according to multiple news reports, she stated that Bondi had revealed that she has no intentions of answering questions, so she would yield the remainder of her time. It was a calculated move. By yielding, Crockett was making a point. There was no point in continuing to ask questions of someone who had no intention of providing honest answers. But the confrontation wasn't over yet. After Crockett yielded her time, Chairman Jordan allowed Attorney General Bondi to respond. And Bondi's response revealed everything about where her priorities truly lay. She didn't address the FBI files Crockett had cited. She didn't respond to the allegations about Trump's connections to Epstein. She didn't explain why 0 co-conspirators had been indicted. Instead, she attacked. According to news reports, Bondi went after House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, alleging that he had accepted money from Epstein after Epstein's conviction. It was classic deflection. When asked about the president's documented connections to a sex trafficker, attack a Democratic leader instead. Don't defend. Don't explain. Just counterattack. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't having it. Her response was immediate and forceful. According to reports, she said, "Convicted. So what we talking about? Convict some of these perpetrators that raped these women that are sitting behind you. But you refuse to even acknowledge they are here." The words cut through the room like a knife. Sitting behind you. The survivors. Right there. Less than 10 feet away. And the Attorney General of the United States refused to even turn around and look at them. Refused to acknowledge their presence. Refused to apologize for exposing their identities. Refused to commit to prosecuting the people who harmed them. Bondi, now clearly angry, began listing off alleged criminals from Texas, trying to make Crockett's district look bad. She rattled off names and crimes, trying desperately to change the subject from Epstein to anything else, to shift focus away from the uncomfortable questions about presidential connections to sex trafficking and toward generic attacks on Democrats. And that's when Jasmine Crockett stood up and walked out. Multiple eyewitness accounts and news reports confirm that she gathered her papers, rose from her seat, and left the hearing room while Bondi was still talking. The cameras caught it all. Crockett collecting her materials, standing, turning, and walking out with her head held high. It was a visual statement more powerful than any words. When the Attorney General cares more about protecting the president than pursuing justice for survivors, when deflection replaces answers, when political loyalty trumps constitutional duty, sometimes the only appropriate response is to leave. Sometimes staying and participating in a broken process gives that process legitimacy it doesn't deserve. Crockett wasn't the only one who walked out that day. Representative Becca Balint of Vermont also left after Bondi implied Balint had voted against a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. According to The Hill, Balint shot back before leaving. "You want to go there? Are you serious?" Talking about anti-Semitism to a woman who lost her grandfather in the Holocaust. Then she too gathered her things and left. 2 congresswomen walking out of a hearing is extraordinary. It's the kind of thing that happens maybe once or twice in a congressional session, if that. It's a dramatic break from normal procedure, a public statement that the process has become so fundamentally broken that participation is no longer possible or appropriate. and the fact that it happened twice in the same hearing, for related reasons, spoke volumes about just how dysfunctional the proceeding had become. The walkouts were the most visually dramatic moments of the day, but they were symptoms of a larger pattern that emerged during those 5 hours. That pattern revealed something troubling about how the Justice Department under Pam Bondi intended to handle the Epstein case, and, by extension, how it intended to handle accountability for powerful individuals more broadly. Every time a Democrat asked a substantive question about the Epstein files, about the botched release, about accountability for alleged perpetrators, Bondi would employ one of several tactics. She would claim she couldn't discuss ongoing investigations, even though she wouldn't confirm whether any investigations were actually ongoing. She would attack the previous administration, trying to shift blame for problems happening on her watch. She would deflect to other topics entirely, like crime statistics or unrelated Democratic officials. Or she would become aggressive and accusatory, treating legitimate oversight questions as personal attacks. Then, consistently, she would ask the next Republican questioner to yield their time so she could launch extended counterattacks against the Democrats who had just questioned her. It was a pattern designed to avoid accountability while creating the appearance of vigorous defense. It turned an oversight hearing into a partisan battlefield where the actual subject, justice for Epstein's victims, got lost in the crossfire. Even some Republicans expressed frustration with how the Justice Department had handled the file release. Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who had co-authored the law requiring the Epstein files to be released, criticized the redaction choices. According to news reports, Massie said the DOJ only unredacted certain names because he had caught them red-handed in their attempt to shield powerful individuals. The problem was clear and undeniable. Victims' names were exposed while perpetrators' names were hidden. One congressional aide demonstrated during the hearing how this worked in practice. An email that concealed the identity of one of Epstein's associates was shown next to a file that publicly listed victims' names and private details. The hearing itself had to blur these documents when displaying them to protect the victims, but the damage had already been done when the files were first released to the public. Democrats also pressed Bondi on another troubling development. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's convicted co-conspirator who is serving a 20-year prison sentence for sex trafficking, had recently been transferred from a federal correctional institution to a minimum security camp. Reports indicated she was receiving special privileges including puppy time, private workouts, and secretarial services. For survivors watching these developments, it felt like yet another example of the system protecting the powerful while ignoring the vulnerable. When questioned about this transfer, Bondi claimed she didn't know about it, despite it happening under her watch as Attorney General. The person running the Justice Department claimed ignorance about the treatment of one of the most high-profile prisoners in federal custody. It strained credulity. Throughout all of this, the survivors sat quietly behind Bondi. They listened as their trauma was debated, their privacy violations were dismissed as errors, their quest for justice was treated as a political football. They watched as the Attorney General refused to turn around and look at them. They heard her dismiss their advocates' concerns as theatrics. They witnessed zero commitment to prosecuting the people who had harmed them. By the time the hearing ended after 5 hours, what had become clear was this: the Justice Department under Pam Bondi was not prioritizing justice for Epstein's victims. It was prioritizing protection of powerful individuals who had connections to Epstein, including and especially the President of the United States. The survivors who had shown up seeking acknowledgement left without it. The Democrats who had demanded accountability received deflection instead. and the American people watching at home were left wondering when justice became optional for those with enough power and connections. In the days following February 11th, video clips from the hearing went viral across social media platforms. The clip of Crockett citing the FBI files about Trump's connections to Epstein was viewed millions of times. Her walkout became a symbol for many Americans frustrated with what they saw as a Justice Department more interested in protecting power than pursuing justice. News outlets across the political spectrum covered the hearing, though their interpretations of what happened varied predictably along partisan lines. On February 12th, the Democratic members of the House Judiciary Committee released an official statement. They titled it, "Unhinged Bondi refuses to look Epstein survivors in the eye or apologize for leaking their identities and private information as she doubles down on grotesque cover-up to protect sexual predators." Those are strong words, but they reflected what millions had watched unfold in real time over those 5 hours. Representative Jasmine Crockett appeared on multiple news programs in the following days. Unlike some of her previous viral moments, she wasn't making jokes or crafting memorable one-liners. She was serious, focused, and clearly affected by what she had witnessed. She spoke about the courage it took for those survivors to sit in that room. She talked about how the Justice Department had re-traumatized them by exposing their identities. She explained why the American people deserved answers about powerful men who had exploited vulnerable girls. This hearing came at a significant time for Crockett personally. She's currently running for the United States Senate in Texas, a highly competitive race that's being closely watched nationally. Some political analysts suggested her confrontation with Bondi was calculated to raise her profile for that race. But others noted that Crockett has a history as a public defender, someone who spent years representing people who couldn't afford their own attorneys. For her, this wasn't political theater. It was about what the legal system is supposed to do: protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. As of now, several crucial questions remain unanswered. How many of Epstein's co-conspirators is the Justice Department actively investigating? Why were victims' names left exposed while perpetrators' names were redacted? What is the nature of the ongoing investigations Bondi referenced but refused to detail? When will the survivors who sat in that room finally get the justice they've been seeking for years? And perhaps most fundamentally, what does it say about American democracy when the justice system appears to have different standards for the powerful than for everyone else? February 11th, 2026 will be remembered as one of those rare moments when the carefully maintained facade drops, when the usual political games give way to something raw and real. When a congresswoman from Texas stood up and said what millions were thinking. When survivors showed up seeking acknowledgement and got silence. When an attorney general was asked to choose between loyalty to a president and loyalty to justice, and her choice became abundantly clear. Jasmine Crockett walked out of that hearing room because sometimes staying silent in the face of injustice is worse than walking away. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is refusing to participate in a process that has lost its purpose. And sometimes the facts speak loudly enough that no amount of deflection can drown them out. This has been Under Scrutiny. We present the facts. We let you draw the conclusions. As of this reporting, the situation continues to develop. We source from across the political spectrum because facts don't have a party affiliation. This investigation used reports from conservative outlets like Fox News alongside progressive outlets like The Grio, mainstream sources like CNN and Al Jazeera, and official government statements. Every source is credible. Every claim is verifiable. For educators, this documentary can be used as a case study in Congressional oversight processes, justice system accountability, investigative journalism standards, how survivors navigate institutional systems, political dynamics in high-profile hearings. Under Scrutiny is committed to presenting political events with rigorous factual accuracy, allowing viewers to understand what actually happened rather than what partisan narratives claim happened.